Welcome to Navigating Complex Divorce and Parenting Issues with Attorney Melanie Walls.
Welcome back to Navigating Complex Divorce and Parenting Issues with Attorney Melanie Walls. Melanie is an OSBA certified specialist in family relations law who helps clients navigate financial decisions with long-term impact, including what happens to the marital home during a divorce. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're focusing on how decisions about the home are made, what options are typically considered, and what factors tend to shape those outcomes. Ms. Melanie, welcome back.
Thank you. Great to see you, Evan.
Good to see you as well. So, Melanie, what are the primary options for handling a marital home in a divorce?
Typically, you have two options. One spouse keeps the home and buys the other spouse out, or the home is sold. So those are the primary options, and that's what the court would decide if the parties cannot reach an agreement. Either one party or the other keeps the home, or it gets listed with a realtor and sold.
What factors tend to drive the decision between one person keeping the home and the property being sold?
There's a couple of things that play into that. Typically, the first thing you want to do is have the client reach out to a loan officer to determine whether or not they can qualify to refinance the home if there's a mortgage on it. And that tends to be a hurdle in some cases. For example, if you have a stay-at-home mom that hasn't been in the workforce for several years, the bank is not going to consider that person for refinancing because they want to see at least 6 months of income for that person before they would consider them for refinancing. That's something you could negotiate in the settlement to allow that spouse more time, say, for example, up to a year to refinance. Considerations today are a little different with the rising price of rent. You really need to take a look at, hey, you're in a 3-bedroom home and your mortgage is $1,800 a month. What in your area, what are the rents for a 3-bedroom apartment? And they're a lot more than the mortgage. So you also have to look at not only can they refinance, but if they choose to sell the home, is that financially wise? Because then they may be paying more in rent. So there are a lot of factors that go into that consideration of whether to keep the home or sell the home.
So how is the equity in the home typically calculated? How is that value handled in that division process?
So first you would look at the value of the home, and that can be done a couple of different ways. The parties can agree as to what they believe the value of the home is. The parties can look to the county auditor's website. That's typically not a good value of the home. It's typically on the lower end. The parties can Google and use Zillow and some of the other sites out there to reach an agreement. Again, that's not typically a reliable number. The prevailing way to value a home in a divorce or dissolution is to have an appraisal done of the home. You hire an appraiser to go out. The parties either split the cost or one party pays for it. Once you get their appraisal back, the parties review it. If the other party doesn't agree with the appraiser's value, they can choose to get a second appraisal done. But an appraisal is the best and most reliable way to determine the value of real estate.
So if one spouse keeps the home, how is a buyout typically structured?
Well, that depends, and that's very case specific. It will depend on whether they have other marital assets that they can allocate to the spouse. They can refinance and pay the spouse half of the equity in the home, or some other way the spouse can keep more of their retirement. There are different ways, and you can get creative depending upon the finances of the parties and the other available assets of the marriage.
How do mortgage obligations and refinancing requirements affect whether someone can realistically even keep the home?
The mortgage plays a key role in the refinance because of a couple things. Most mortgages are not assumable. So if a party wants to keep the home, they are going to have to take out a loan and pay off that existing mortgage. That may or may not be feasible. In today's market, some people have 3%, 4% mortgages, and they're looking at, with the refinance or taking out a new loan, 6 or 7%. That's really going to cause their monthly payment to go up. So all of that factors into the mortgage and how much equity do they have in the home. Those all play a factor in whether or not it's wise for a party to keep the marital residence.
Can you describe a situation where the decision about the home became more complex than maybe originally expected?
Sometimes you run into difficulty if the parties decide to sell the marital residence. If one party is remaining in the home, they have to keep the home show ready. They have to cooperate with the showings. They have to cooperate with the listing agent. And if you have a difficult party in a case, that can be difficult, and you may need to get court orders. You may need to have them removed from the home so the home can be sold. So selling the home can be a little bit more difficult if you have a party that is not cooperating with the listing agent or with the sale of the real estate.
How are disagreements over the value of the home typically resolved during the divorce process, Melanie?
That is done by obtaining an appraisal and sometimes even a second appraisal. If parties cannot agree on the value, then you look to an expert to determine the value. And that's what the court would rely on, would be the expert's opinion of the value of the real estate along with the appraisal report.
What longer-term financial consequences should be considered before deciding to keep the home?
I think you need to look at the overall financial picture of the party that wants to keep the home. What are their other expenses? What's the mortgage? What are the utilities? And is it financially feasible and within their budget? And does it make financial sense for them to keep the home?
And how do considerations like children, school stability, daily routines shape the outcome when it comes to the home?
The typical rule of thumb when it comes to retaining the marital residence is you want to try to keep the children in the home for at least the first year after the termination of the marriage. I mean, that's their stability, that's their comfort zone. You really don't want to have the turmoil of the marriage dissolving and having to pick up and move. So the general rule of thumb, even if the parties know they don't want to retain the marital residence long term, at least retain it for a year to allow the children to adjust to the new life of having their parents living in two different homes, and then try and sell the home. That's ideal when you have young children. You want to take that into consideration, and you want to keep them in their school for as long as possible.
Well, good stuff, Miss Melanie. Thank you so much. That's it for today's episode of Navigating Complex Divorce and Parenting Issues with Attorney Melanie Walls. To learn more about Melanie's practice or request a consultation, visit melaniewallslaw.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.